So joining us today on the far left is George Camus, an ICIT Fellow and CTO, Global Government and Critical Infrastructure Protection at Forcepoint. To his left, Rob Roy, ICIT Fellow and Public Sector CTO, Micro Focus Government Solutions. His left is John Brickey, an ICIT Fellow and SVP Cybersecurity Evangelist at MasterCard. And to my immediate left, Mike Ainsworth, an ICIT Fellow and Senior Director, Public Sector Cloud Security Solutions at McAfee. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. To start with, so when discussing, and we had a really great panel prep call, as we always do to get these conversations going. When discussing IT modernization, most people always think about databases, and moving to the cloud, but in today's world, particularly with robotics and machine learning and artificial intelligence, modernization can mean so much more. And then when you factor in national security, which is one of the objectives of this conversation, it really becomes a loaded term. So I think to level set for the audience, wanted to have each of you kind of start with sharing your definition of what IT modernization is in today's very complex and kind of layered environment, and anyone can kind of kick it off.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll go first. IT modernization, I think everybody would agree it's a term that's sort of talked to death. It's rather vague, and it's probably relative to the context of the mission of your organization. When I think about IT modernization, one of the buzzwords that was attached to that yesterday and still today is cloud, but as I think about it today and tomorrow, we're starting to talk about blockchain, we're starting to talk about artificial intelligence, and what does all this really mean? When I think about IT modernization, I think if we focus on things that improve the security, the agility, and the efficiency of the organization, and apply that to the technologies we're using, that's probably a good start in the context of your mission.
So I'm George Camus, Forcepoint CTO. I agree, cloud is certainly key in IT modernization, also mobility, and there's challenges to both of them. Going a little deeper, I think those technologies are moving ahead, but if we look in the future, I think we need to start looking at, especially from an IT security point of view, how do we get rid of static policies that are applied to everyone across the board and everyone that accesses the data? How do we make that more risk adaptive? How do we start looking and modeling how humans interact with the data and how they do that on a daily basis, and if they start to deviate from that? So that goes back to more of the machine learning thing. So there's a lot of new technologies out there that, although that, cloud's here today and we're going to it and that's the main thrust of mobility, there's a lot of other little things that are certainly worth looking at.
I love this topic because it can mean so many things to so many people. You ask 4 people what their definition of IT modernization is, you'll probably get about 10 answers, right? The one area I think that I won't reiterate, I agree with cost and risk and looking at very discrete areas of what we can do. But what we can do, to me, is defined by opportunity. If we look at the term IT modernization, what this current administration is doing to promote it is to get us talking about it and into looking at new ways that we can do things to achieve better cost outcomes, save money, not necessarily save it. I was at a table recently that said, you never get promoted for saving money in government, but to perhaps repurpose it, to utilize the savings that you get from one system and the reduced risk that you get from it, to then invest in new capabilities and in new services that can fulfill the mission of government. So I see it personally just as opportunity to engage a new discussion and to improve the capabilities that we have as a civilization.
Well, since I was snowboarding during the call, this is my first time hearing your thoughts on this, but I couldn't agree more. I see it as a strategic refresh of your people, processes, and technologies. And at MasterCard, I know we see this. So we don't use IT modernization as a term. I left government last year, and it's kind of refreshing to not hear the terms used over and over again. But it's basically what we're doing now. So we're in the middle of a major initiative, and we see it as a huge opportunity for the future.
Great. So obviously, in the context of the folks in this room, when we talk about IT modernization, one of the big benefits of it is from a cybersecurity perspective, and many of you alluded to that. Focusing on the IT piece of some of the definitions you gave, can we talk about, each of you kind of have different perspectives on this, and that's why we put the panel together. What are some of the positive impacts from a cyber perspective, and conversely, what are some of the risks, particularly from a national security perspective, if we do not and continue to put off modernization in the context that you guys have described?
I'll go first and someone last, maybe that'll help. So I see it as an opportunity, from the security perspective, an opportunity to really leapfrog some of these incremental changes. And we're able to shed kind of some of the past issues and challenges we've had if we can kind of strategically redesign networks, operations and such, and again, be able to leapfrog and kind of shed some of the problems that we've had in the past. So for security, I think it can be a good thing, but the challenge is there's so many interdependencies and complexities with just operations, and you add security to the mix, and it makes it that much more challenging.
Yeah, it's like trying to replace the airplane engine while you're in flight. It becomes incredibly complex, and we try to simplify the context of what we are attempting to do. Vendors will come in and approach it in a certain way and say, well, if you modernize this piece over here, I'll give you this benefit over there from a risk reduction perspective. And there are a number of ways, you can attack this type of a problem with in a number of different ways. Wholesale move to the cloud. Put everything in the cloud and offset your risk, transfer your risk to somebody else, and hope that they're able to hire the correct workforce to manage that risk a little bit better than we're able to in government because of one reason or another, the workforce challenges that we have and so forth. So certainly, the ability to move forward, if we don't do it, that was part of your question, the risk is obvious. We have systems out there today that have been in production. I don't know. I know of several systems that are over 50 years old. I know of some systems, and Dr. Latier's organization, that go back to, I don't know, when was Windows 2000 released? Anybody know? Trick question. So back around before the year 2000, and we're still using some of these systems out there. We've got COBOL systems. Anybody remember COBOL? They perform missions. They are stable, robust systems that perform missions of government. However, we need to be able to protect all of that while moving to a DevSecOps environment and creating the next generation of applications. And if we don't do it, well, we're going to be stuck in this rut that we've been in for quite a long time.
Good point. The nice thing is that we're always trying to modernize. Back when I started in cybersecurity 20 years ago, even before it was called cybersecurity, security was always an afterthought. It was always a bolt-on at the very end. Many of those old systems that you've talked about, security was an afterthought. Today, at least, it's at the forefront. So as we're moving into new technology, moving into the cloud, we're embracing security and making sure that's part of the architecture and a key part of the architecture. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I mostly agree that security is at the forefront, though I think that there's still a temptation with new technologies, especially some of the cloudier variants that are very sort of consumer-centric, that we have tools that empower a lot of capability to collaborate, to build quickly, to automate, but then we're missing basic guardrails, warnings to users that they've misconfigured something so that it's allowing for data exfiltration, some sort of mechanism to advise people that using collaboration tech capabilities that are insecure or using storage that's not being managed securely on the back end is probably problematic. So I think having the guardrails in place, like if you think about the auto industry and having your lane departure notifications in cars, which is becoming standard these days, having the ability to notify and protect so that we can take the human-focused approach, borrowing from Dr. Tibbetts this morning, is essential as well.
So the paper that I mentioned earlier in the title is talking about dispelling the fear of IT modernization. And we talked about this on the call. A lot of times organizations and individuals within organizations use fear as an excuse as to why we're not modernizing. And on the call, and you mentioned Cobalt, right? Obviously, there is a reality that we can't overnight or in a short period of time just move everything over to the cloud. However, we do know that, particularly in the public sector, we are lagging behind the commercial space in terms of moving to the cloud. So, next question to the panelists is, why do you feel in the public sector, or John, I think you have a unique ability to maybe speak more candidly since you just recently left the government and now are in the financial sector. Why do you think we're afraid, and what is it that we're afraid of, and what's holding us back, and how can we overcome those fears?
Well, I can just say from the commercial world, what I'm seeing is, we have a need. We're always seeking a competitive advantage. And of course, there's different motives for us to do what we do, but there's always risk, and the risk I see why some, even in the commercial world, may be delaying this, is because of the unknown. There's so many complexities in an organization with your information systems, and making that move. And I think most organizations typically are looking at three main vendors when it comes to the cloud. And they all are a little bit different, and understanding what the impact will be is difficult, and how you'll do your operations. Most people aren't going to lift and shift, although it sounds appealing to be able to just move everything there. You really have to go through a very deliberate process and understand the risk involved. So I think it's kind of a very large bite to take.
Yeah.
And so you have to figure out what's important strategically and make your moves that way.
Yeah, just to add to that, I was talking to a large government agency just yesterday that kind of shifted my original comments on what I'd prepared for previously on this idea, is the idea of transformation. One of the things I think industry has had to do more rapidly than government is to be able to move away from older ideas and adopt new technologies and take that big bite. Where in government we want to know that it's something safe, something's proven, and it's if you don't have a lot of confidence when things change every 2 years that this is the safe, proven technology, right? But in order to get away from legacy systems, you really do have to start to look at things as, is this a modernization effort, or is this really a transformation effort, where we're going to start to look at how we move to entire new stacks, rather than having 50 different systems that we're using to provide service. What if I can collapse these into new as-a-service technologies and reduce that stack significantly? And I think we have to be brave in looking at it from that lens at times as well.
I think the government's also faced with some challenges. There's so much of a push to go to cloud, which I believe is the right thing. However, there's not a lot of good information on how you make that transition. We heard someone earlier today saying, rip and replace, right? Take a system and just throw it into the cloud. Well, that's not the right cloud strategy. The right cloud strategy is to leverage the capabilities of cloud, of scalability, failover, redundancy. But it just seems to me that there's not good guidance on how to do that. It's more like just get to the cloud. Furthermore, government being government, it's difficult for commercial entities to get into the cloud. The FedRAMP process is not the speediest or cost-effective process out there. You have to get a government sponsor, and it takes a lot of time. Just from a force point experience of trying to get onto C2S, we have to get a FOCI agreement approved by the government. We're 80% owned by the Raytheon, and Vista Equity Partners, the remaining 20%, but we have to provide a foreign ownership, control, and influence document that's taken 5 months to approve. So why does it take that long? If we want to move quickly in IT modernization, we need to make these processes faster so we can get to the cloud quicker.
Agreed. And change is hard. Change is very difficult and often requires, or always requires, strong leadership. People follow strong leaders. If somebody has a great idea and they back it up with proper guidance and resources to get it done, that's the kick in the pants that a lot of people need to overcome that fear. I did have a kind of an interesting experience in the Department of Defense once. I had an awesome cybersecurity idea for the Department of Defense, and I wanted to roll it out across the entire department. So I spoke to a director of an information assurance division, and we laid out the whole idea, and I got nods around the table, and everyone said, "Wow, that is an awesome idea. We'd love to do it." I said, "Great. When can we get started?" And she said, she looked behind her at a field of legal volumes behind her and said, "As soon as you get yourself into one of those volumes over there, because I have my day job, I have my legal requirements, I have the requirements that come from the law, and the budget follows the requirements. And I'm doing all I can every day to meet the letter of the law, and all of my people have to do the same thing." So in order to implement change in that context, I had to go to Capitol Hill to lobby then and talk about how do we implement change for the good of the department. And it worked out. As a matter of fact, Dr. Latier was a recipient of it and implemented it across the entire Marine Corps and has a world-class software security assurance program in the department right now.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, please.
So this is kind of fitting on the break. I was actually downstairs and I ran into Admiral Winnefeld, the former Vice Chairman of Joint Chiefs. And the funny thing was I was working at Cyber Command a few years ago, and they said, "Here, we want you to work on this thing with Admiral Winnefeld." It was on the DoD Cyber Culture Initiative, DC3I. And he was leading this thing. He was retiring like in a month. Wanted to get something done in DoD in 1 month, signed by the SecDef. Well, he left a month later. We did our work. It got signed 2 months after that. So 3 months later, but it took leadership and somebody, basically who could actually enable that. Not, sometimes it's just a matter of what level that person is, but it was exciting to see.
Excellent. Good story. I didn't know that. So the last question here is, this was an idea that came up on the conversation we had. Sometimes it's nice to dream and think big, and we have some experts here on the stage. So I wanted each of you to share your vision of what risk reduction looks like if you had your way, and if you've all either been in government or work extensively in government, and if you could fix kind of one area of government from a modernization perspective, given some of the areas of expertise and the technologies you represent and have worked with. And to the audience members, I would say, I know that you're probably like, oh, that would be nice, but keep in mind that these technologies exist, and it really comes down to leadership and acquisition and process, and someone just pushing these things through, right? So what they're describing here is all doable. We just got to get through some of the challenges that they've described. So I think we'll just start with Mike and go down. What's one area that you think, given tools and technologies and capabilities that are out there, that we can actually get done and solve today?
Absolutely. A lot of the frameworks that people use as guidance to adopt technology don't necessarily apply intuitively to modern systems. If I'm looking at the DISA SRGs or NIST 153, and you just give that a thorough read through, a lot of what comes to mind are virtual server or physical server management, network management concepts. I'm looking at applying a software as a service application, and I try to match the two up, and a lot of times it's difficult. It doesn't make a lot of sense to do that intuitively. So in my dream world, what I'd love to do is to be able to kind of take a summarized bits of documents as they apply to certain technologies So where you could say, here are the controls that are inherited, so we're going to focus on these key areas to expedite the risk conversations, and even look at how we can use technologies that are cataloging risks to expedite those risk conversations further, so that the analysis and A&A process can be expedited, and you can start to consume cloud-based services and other technologies more rapidly.
So I think, so I'm going to dovetail on what I was saying earlier, just the uncertainty with changes in your environments, moving to new architectures like the cloud. I think back to when I first started looking at geographic information systems and how the Army was using, well, all the military, I guess, was using simulation capabilities. So years ago, I'd get inside the tank simulator and those sorts of environments, so that was pretty cool. But when I saw them simulating fly-throughs, or who's a pilot here, what do you guys call that? Basically, you're doing a recon in a simulation environment. I think we need that more. I would love to have that in the cybersecurity environment, where we could understand what the impact of our changes may be in the future. So something that emulates our environments. I know there are some out there, I don't know how good they are at emulating these environments. So, and where we could basically reconfigure our network and kind of do a what-if scenario planning and determine what the right course of action is, so we can reduce the risk before we take the actions.
Interesting, yeah.
So you said nirvana, right?
Yes.
So we've got an unlimited budget in the government and a fully trained workforce that we don't know how to employ properly. Fully staffed. We've got everything, So there's two areas. I'll just get very tactical in this right now because I see them as huge gaps. They're in the IT Modernization report out of the ATC, American Technology Council. The two areas that they specifically are looking at to help organizations improve from a risk reduction perspective is, number one, start protecting the data better. Encrypting it with quantum safe encryption and encrypt it everywhere. So finding the high value assets, the mission sensitive data, protecting it, whether it's just on the disk, which has been the norm for many, many years, but also over the wire now, so that was added to the modernization report. And now another gap that's been inserted in there is while it's in use. So while a user who has legitimate access to it is looking at that data, it should be continued to be protected. You can use data today. 90% of the jobs that utilize data can be done without decrypting or exposing any sensitive data inside. So that's one area. The other one that we heard the phishing exercise from DHS this morning, and I think there's estimates out there that 25% of people inside of an organization during a phishing exercise are going to click on that. Well, even if we reduce that down to 1%, that's one too many. Because as soon as somebody gets a purchase, and we heard him deliver this morning, as soon as he gets a foot in that door, he's going sideways and he's going to own the organization. It's a very, very difficult problem. What can we do today? We can't capture all the data that's happening. We need an environment where we can capture everything and analyze it instantly. And those technologies are becoming available today. Capture everything in the organization, understand every single event that's happening in the organization, analyze it instantly, and have an immediate response to a breach detection. We're getting there. We're doing a lot better at it. But those are two areas that I'd say that we could do a better job.
Right.
Actually, I agree. We talked to a number of CISOs in the commercial side and also on the government side, and they're tired of putting point solutions, point security solutions in to protect their infrastructure and just getting too much data. So how do we take more of a holistic approach and start looking at how the human is interacting with the data and how they do that on a daily basis? With technology today, we can model my behavior of what I do in an office. My day-to-day job is pretty consistent. I live in Outlook. I live on the web browser. I hit certain websites. I heard certain data repositories on our network. I can model that. But if for some reason I break that model, and start accessing data that I shouldn't be accessing, I should be able to trigger on that and give indication that something's gone wrong. Maybe I'm not even at my computer today. I haven't badged into the office. There's no record of me physically badging in and someone's using my computer or stole my identity. We can detect that. We can take action on that. And that will also allow us to open up the security restrictions on the infrastructure. Because today, we put everything down at the tightest level because of a couple bad people. Why not just look at behaviors, look how they're interacting with the data, let them do their job, but when they deviate, go investigate.
Excellent. Outstanding. Well, we're just about out of time, so please help me in thanking our panelists today.